Today, we are moving on to a new question. Oh, Pam, I have to share this with you too. So we have a new slogan for our class that I found this summer. It's a Latin slogan from a sermon given by St. Augustine on John chapter 1, verse 1. He said, Si enim comprehendis non est Deus, which translates roughly to, if you understand it, it is not God. So that'll help us, kind of feel better about these classes when we go down all these rabbit holes and have ourselves all confused and wondering what on earth is going on. So this week we're talking about, did you want to copy that down? I can go back.
Yeah.
This week we're talking about the question, how should Christians interact with non-Christians? And this question was asked to me from the perspective of, what is the alternative to kind of the guy on the street corner with the bullhorn? What is it that God really wants us to be doing here when we're interacting with people who are not Christians? And so, as usual, I thought we should start with some assumptions. And the question itself, contains a few assumptions. The question assumes that there is a difference, probably a fundamental difference, between these two categories of Christian and non-Christian. And so I wanted to start with just spending a couple minutes thinking about what makes someone a Christian. And, maybe in other words, what does a Christian have or do that a non-Christian doesn't have or doesn't do? And the answer to this question has been changing and developing over the course of history. So this is not an exhaustive list, I guess I should say, but these are just some kind of pinpoints in time to kind of get us thinking a little bit about this. So in the early church, after the persecution of Christians started to become a little bit more established across the entire known world, martyrdom was, it is going to be kind of weird to say, but martyrdom was kind of popular. It was believed by some that the only way to truly express your identity as a Christian was to die for your faith. That if you were still alive, you could potentially not actually be a Christian. You could potentially be someone who was kind of faking it, or not fully in it, not fully committed to being a Christian. In some less strident groups, there was another category. We've heard of the category martyr, and it's very, very common even today to talk about that. But there was another category, and they called those people confessors. These were people who suffered for their faith. They were arrested, they were likely, beaten up in some way. And then when they were brought to trial, they refused to recant their faith. They stood up and said, yes, I am a Christian. I believe in Jesus. Do with me what you will. And then somehow or another, because of the laws or the person they were with, or whatever it was, who they were, they didn't actually get killed for it. But they still stood up for their faith in the face of potential death and potential crackdown from the government. So these confessors were people who were seen as kind of the pinnacle of Christian faith, just slightly less than the martyrs, who of course, were dead and could not be spoken to or seen as leaders in the church anymore. And there were some regions in early Christendom, well, not Christendom, because that's a whole different thing. In the early Christian church, there were some regions where no one who had not experienced some kind of attested and proved persecution experience was allowed to be a bishop. So they believed that in order to kind of earn your stripes, earn your right to be a leader in the Christian church, you had to have some kind of proven experience of persecution of some kind. You had to be a confessor. You had to experience some kind of, possibly physical persecution. And if you didn't have that, if you had not experienced that, you could not be a bishop because you had not proven that you were a true Christian. Perhaps you'd even recanted your faith or lied to the government in order to get out of getting into trouble. And so kind of in this extreme sense, Christian versus non-Christian can only be proven really by death or by near-death experience for that faith. And without that, you weren't necessarily considered fully a Christian or kind of a confirmed Christian. Additionally, in the early church, as time went on and kind of things got established, there was an extended process for catechumens, for people who wanted to become Christians. There was a long process of learning and growing toward the final ritual of baptism. So it wasn't just that someone could say, oh, I want to be baptized, or it wasn't that a baby could be baptized. You had to engage in at least a year, sometimes even several years, of learning about what Christianity was and the theology and what it was you're committing to. And then finally, at the very end, you participated in the ritual of baptism. And there's a lot of really interesting literature and academic writing out there about this process and about the early rites of Christianity. But it's very much modeled after Roman cultic practices. There were a lot of cults where, for example, in order to be ritually kind of brought into the cult, you would descend in these stairs into this kind of empty bathing pool basically area, and you would come underneath this, there would be a bull, like an actual animal bull, and they would slice open the bull and its blood would pour down over you. And that's how you would be, that's how you would be kind of baptized into your cultic group, whatever it was you were doing. And so the Christians kind of modeled after this, but of course they didn't use the blood of a bull, they used water for baptizing. And so they would descend into the pool filled with water, and they would be fully immersed into the water, and then they would come out, and then that was kind of the culmination of their experience. So for many of us today, and particularly for those of us who believe in infant baptism, baptism is the first step in a lifelong relationship with God and lifelong learning and growing. But this was more of a kind of, you have to prepare toward baptism as sort of like the graduation into being a Christian. So skipping forward several thousand years, not several thousand, about 1,000, a little more than 1,000. In the Middle Ages, when we're thinking about non-Christian and non-Christian, it's important to note that how the church, how the European leaders of all kinds, because there wasn't really the differentiation between political leaders and religious leaders that we have today. The heavy emphasis on the non-humanity of the non-Christian, that really, in their minds, I don't think that there was a difference between person and Christian, that if you weren't a Christian, you were not human. And so I pulled up this picture of a knight fighting against, this is actually Saladin, who was a famous Muslim leader in the Middle Ages. And you can see the features on his face You can see how he is depicted in such a monstrous way, that he's not depicted as a human. He's got this grimace, he's got these heavy, angry eyebrows, he's got this blue skin, and he's depicted in such a way that it's clear that he is not seen as human, because he's a Muslim, he's the enemy, he's a heathen, he's an abomination. And so this idea that there really are no non-Christians in terms of interacting with people from a human perspective. These people should be treated like the animals that they are. These people should be eradicated because they're just a danger to our society and to our our Christendom at this point, heavily established. And so through time, this started to have additional implications for people even within European communities. During the Reformation period, by the Reformation period, the way that you were kind of registered and legitimized in your society, in your community, was through the church. So when you were born and you were baptized, that was kind of like the time, like they didn't actually have this, but it would basically be like the equivalent of today. When you're born, in order to receive a social security number, in order to be seen as legitimate in society, in order to receive a birth certificate, you had to be baptized and registered at the church. That's how you got access to those things. And so if you weren't baptized and your name wasn't recorded in the register of the local church, then you couldn't participate in the economy, you couldn't participate in the social life, you couldn't participate in the political life of your community. And so the documents that the church kept were the only documents. And so they were kind of considered basically the government documents. And so that was kind of how you were a person. That was how you were a member of society. And so when the Reformation came around, and some of the groups that even broke off further than the Lutherans and the Reformed did, the Anabaptists, the one who believed that you should not be baptized until you're old enough to choose baptism, to respond to God. These people were not just, kind of making a religious statement, saying a theological statement. They weren't just saying, I believe that the right way to engage with God is to wait until you can respond, until you can choose to be baptized, until you can understand the promises that God is making to you and you are making to God. That wasn't just a kind of a religious choice to form their own church. That was a political choice, an economic choice, a social choice. These people were ostracized. They had to, if you chose to be an Anabaptist, you had to leave the established cities and towns and establish your own place with the other Anabaptists, because you couldn't function in a society where you weren't registered as a baptized person at the church. So this is a picture of what would commonly be done with these people, because again, if you were not registered, if you were not baptized, if you were not part of the economy and the society and the politics of your time, then you were basically not considered to be a person. And so these people would be punished, and usually they were punished with death. And their favorite method of punishing them was through drowning, because they thought that this was hilarious. The irony that these people would not assent to being dipped. And so we're going to dip them to the point that they are unable to breathe and they drown. So this is another example of, kind of the difference between like what makes a Christian. A Christian is someone who is baptized and registered and falling in line with the status quo of how things are done around here. And so, this kind of model really continued. We stopped killing people for not being Christians, but you get to the point where in the 1950s and 1960s, there was an expectation that you be a member of some church you be a member in good standing, you appear with your bottom on the seat or the pew every week. And if not, there wasn't necessarily any kind of official government sanction, but there were certainly social sanctions. In order to be seen as a good and moral member of your society, you had to be a member of a church. And so without that, you didn't get to participate fully in the economy. You didn't get to fully participate in the social life of your community. If you were a butcher and you weren't seen in church for several weeks, you better be really, really sick, or people are going to stop coming to your shop, because what's going on with him? Why isn't he in church? Why isn't he part of this community? Being a Christian was about being in the church community. And so that's kind of how that was defined. And so you can see that there's been a development, there's been a sense of, what makes a Christian has changed over the course of time. So I wanted to see, I'll stop talking for a couple minutes and see what you all think. What defines a Christian today?
I don't know. I'm drawing a blank. It can't be just because people say they are, or because they attend a church. I don't know. How do you define that?
I think it's their behavior. I mean, you're either living your life, like Jesus exemplified, or you're not.
You would say that, Pam.
I would.
Yes, but I think first and foremost, it's someone who believes in God, but we don't know that. They, that's what they believe. But you don't have to be a Christian to be a good person and helpful and friendly. And so to me, it's it's someone who believes in God. But we don't go around asking people if they do that. But it starts with that, and then we do what Jesus wants us to do and be good and help others and that kind of thing. I don't know if that's right.
Yeah. The golden rule comes from many faiths. So there's just all these different paths, I think, and Christianity is one of them.
So interesting. I didn't hear baptism listed by anybody as kind of central to Christian identity, or required or assumed as part of Christian identity. What do we think about that?
Well, in some places, you are baptized into the church so that the whole family helps you out as a child or as an adult. You're all in it together. And it's, so I think, yeah. I guess that's where I kind of think baptism is nowadays.
All right, well, let me ask a different question, but that maybe will help us with this a little bit. If we can't quite pin down what defines a Christian today, then how does one, quote unquote, switch sides? If we've got these two categories of Christian and non-Christian, what is the mechanism or the process for going from non-Christian to Christian? What do you need to do or be? What needs to happen?
Well, if you're not a Christian, to become a Christian, you do need to be baptized. Right?
Okay. So baptism.
Except you have to accept Jesus as your savior.
That's too much.
Okay. So
Because
maybe we've got that sinner's prayer. Jesus, I know that I am awful, and I believe that you are the one who can rescue me from my sins, and so I commit my life to you today. Is that what you're saying, Karen?
What I'm saying is that the word Christian comes from Christ, and we call Jesus the Christ, and yeah, I guess if you don't identify with Jesus, then you're not a Christian.
Right.
Well, it's that whole thing about being saved or not saved, that goes on in the earthier churches.
So a Christian is someone who's saved, and a non-Christian is someone who's not saved.
Well, that's the common thought process in that area. I don't think you can pin it down that close, but I think it's somebody. Oh, that gets really hairy. If you say it's somebody that believes in Jesus, then what about all the people that I think believe in Jesus but don't call themselves Christian? I think that Muhammad and Buddha both studied Christianity, and that there are some common themes in all of these types of religions. And I can't say, I don't, that's one of those things that I kind of leave up to God, you sort it out. I'm not smart enough.
So I just put up some kind of suggestion, question, ideas here. I think you're hitting on some interesting points here, Karen. Depending on the denomination you're in, in order to be a Christian, you have to say a certain prayer, you have to be baptized, you have to choose it, you have to claim that title of Christian. But then you also have to, have certain beliefs. You have to have a right belief, or you have to have the right behaviors. Maybe you are required to attend church. Maybe you are required to be more Christ-like in daily behavior, whatever that means. Some people, in my opinion, if I got to say on, who gets to be called Christian and who doesn't, I would say that there are some people out there who claim to be the only Christians who are in no way following Christ.
Yeah, me too.
And so is it, do we get to just kind of self-identify ourselves as Christians and nobody else gets to say anything? Or can groups that don't agree on what it means to be Christian say, oh, well, you're not a Christian?
Isn't that between the person and God?
Perhaps. So maybe we do just allow it to be kind of a self-identifier and leave it at that.
But then this is where evil comes into play.
Okay.
Like how do you define evil? Like if someone says they're, maybe that's too far out, but yeah, if someone's doing something like, I don't know, we went to see Fanny in Ashland last week, and so there are all these people that have been beating up Black people, and I'm sure they think they're good Christians, but that's just reprehensible. So there's more to it than just a title. I don't know.
Yeah.
Too far off. Okay.
No. The churches in Germany that did not break off from the government and form themselves into what they called the confessing church, the churches all became Nazis and believed that what they were doing, what they were supporting, was the right thing, was what they were supposed to be doing as Christians. I don't know that, somebody like Hitler himself really believed what he was saying. I think he was using Christianity and the forms of Christianity and the terminologies of Christianity to, pull people closer to him. But he framed what it was he was doing, even in the final solution in the Holocaust. He framed that as Christian. And so, how far do we go when we are allowing others to kind of self-identify before we cut that off and say, no?
That is a good question. I don't know how to answer it.
I
It's
don't
a
either.
slippery slope. So
Yeah. So don't want to beat this into the ground too much, but just wanted to kind of point out that when we're talking about, interacting with non-Christians, quote unquote, sometimes it's, fairly easy. Somebody says to you, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God. Then that's a pretty clear-cut situation. But asking the questions, how should Christians interact with non-Christians, it's a much more diverse group of people, I think, than we tend to think on the surface. Ideally, the way that I treat someone who makes no claim to Christianity should be informed by, and perhaps look similar to, in some ways, the way that I interact with people who do claim that title, but in my opinion, don't live it, don't show it, don't actually know, even understand what it means. Because in my mind, maybe those people are not Christians. So just the question itself, I think, brings up, some additional questions. Additionally, I think this question, how should Christians interact with non-Christians? It assumes that we should be interacting. Just to kind of throw out the option, there are options here. There are groups that isolate themselves from the world. They say, we should not be interacting with non-Christians at all. And so they, kind of create little communes or cults to themselves. Not to quite the same degree, but when I was growing up, a lot of the people at the church when I was a young teen chose to send their children to private Christian schools because they believed that exposing their children to non-Christian children was bad, that they wanted to protect their children, they wanted to raise them and kind of be more in control of what their children were exposed to. And so in a way, that was choosing not to interact with non-Christians. So the assumption that we should be interacting at all is not one that we should just accept and move on, because there are other options. There is the possibility of not interacting at all, of choosing to kind of turn inward into your Christian community. And then I think the question also potentially assumes that maybe there is one right way to interact, but I think it leaves open the possibility of different ways to interact. And so I want to think about some of those a little bit today. So any questions, comments about our assumptions? I know that was a lot of assumption discussion today, but I thought that was important.
One of the things that happened to me, the caretaker that Jack had a totally different viewpoint of being a Christian than I do. And it shocked me sometimes, the things that she would say, and I didn't know how to respond to her. I mean, she was she was very much a Christian, but in my opinion, she wasn't acting like one at all. And she wasn't saying the things that I thought she should be saying, and her outlook was closed. And so it was almost like being with a non-Christian, but not. you
Mm.
know? And I don't know how you I don't know how you reconcile those things, because I think that's why there's so many different churches, is because I happen to believe that God is love, that everything you do should be done with a loving heart, and not that I achieve that, but that's what I believe. And yet there's a lot of people that mix up their politics with it, and their and so things become justified because they think they're justified, you know?
Mhm.
I don't know if that makes sense, and it takes us off of non-Christians, but I think there's a lot of people running around today claiming to be Christians who don't even know what that means
Mhm.
from their behavior standpoint, you know? And I think they're just as more to be pitied than the non-Christian. At least the non-Christian hasn't been exposed to it, doesn't know that what they're doing is opposite Jesus. But I don't know. I'm just rambling. It just
So,
it always bothers me to try to accept that these people are really Christian. And I don't know, that makes my heart hurt, but I don't know how to reconcile that.
Mhm.
They say they are. They feel like they're very devout. And I think they've missed the mark. I don't know.
I guess in my experience, I don't know if they're Christian or not. So, I mean, I don't ever ask that. But having spent 2 weeks in Bosnia, where we worked with children and adults in camps to help them, there were Muslims and Jewish people, and they're not Christian, obviously, but they're so loving and giving and welcoming. I mean, we were strangers there at the start of the 2 weeks, that they're as good a people. I don't know how to say it either, but I don't think about not being Christian. I mean, me, I will be and always am, but I mean, I don't think about others not being Christian interacting with them. I don't know. I mean, but I understand what you're saying too, because certainly I've been involved with people who don't seem like they're Christian, and I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Just, but
how
the
you
Jewish,
define it. So,
Well, I don't make assumptions about that. It's only if they say that, you know,
right.
if they make that a point of our conversation, and then I'm sitting there thinking, you know, I don't want to call you a liar, and I don't want to call you a hypocrite, but those are words that are popping into my head.
has anyone ever asked you if you are a Christian?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Because when someone asks me that, I mean, it's like, well, what do you mean by that? Because we come in different flavors,
Mhm.
and
And a
I
lot
don't
of
want to.
times,
And I would like to be, if I were to say yes, I would like to be clear about the kind I mean, you know. So
yeah, especially
Yeah.
because a lot of times the people who are bold enough to ask that question mean something very different than what you mean when you say it.
Yes. Yes. And we all get painted with this broad brush when we're all so different, you know.
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's a good transition into the next section of our conversation. Because I was thinking about, how do we figure this out? How do we figure out the answer to this question, or some possible answers to this question? And I think that why we are asking this question, what our motivation is in interacting with a non-Christian, matters a lot in the way that we understand what it is that we're trying to do, and therefore how we go about it, so that to help us answer the question. And so for when we're talking about, American Christianity, and we're talking about questions about interacting with non-Christians, the first thing that pops into my mind as someone who was previously part of evangelical circles is that we talk to non-Christians because we want to convert them. We want them to become Christians. And our motivation for that can come from different places. So I've got 3 Bible passages for us to look at that hopefully can engender some thinking and maybe some conversation. So when we're thinking about conversion, we can start with kind of the mandate, the command of Jesus, the last command of Jesus. Matthew 28:19-20. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. So when we're talking about conversion of non-Christians as a motivation, it is biblical. The idea that we have this mandate from Christ, that we are to spread the good news, we are to make disciples, we are to baptize and teach and form people into obedient followers of Jesus, is not, is not just something that was made up by these groups of people who, who focus so heavily on the conversion aspect of things. But getting a little bit deeper into it, we get to something like Romans chapter 10. Because if you confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For one believes with the heart and is so justified, and one confesses with the mouth and is so saved. The scripture says, no one who believes in him will be put to shame, for there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. The same Lord is Lord of all and is generous to all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. But how are they to call on one in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in one of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone to proclaim him? And how are they to proclaim him unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. So here, I think we kind of start to see some divergence, that there's certainly a mandate from Christ that we make more disciples, that we bring others into this world of good news and God's inbreaking kingdom. But why we do that, I think, can have different sources. And even this passage itself can kind of start to give us some hints of that. It talks about everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. And so some people would read that and they would say, well, then all those people who did not call on the name of the Lord are not saved. And gosh, don't I want them to be saved too? Kind of having a negative motivation. But then there are others who might kind of latch onto that last verse. How beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. That don't we have the moral imperative to share that good news with others, that we are overflowing with God's love and grace to the point that we have no choice but to bring it to other people. And so are we focusing on the saved and not saved aspect, or are we focusing on the people who have the good news and people who don't? Are we focusing on, I have something that you need and kind of lording that over? Or are we focusing on, I have something that I can't help but want to share with you because I'm so excited and I think that you should have it too? Then we kind of can move even further and move towards some of the kind of more negative understandings of conversion. This happens to come from Ezekiel chapter 3, but there are plenty of other verses. I just thought this one was pretty poignant. Mortal, this is God speaking. I have made you a sentinel for the house of Israel. Whenever you hear a word from my mouth, you shall give them warning from me. If I say to the wicked, you shall surely die, and you give them no warning or speak to warn the wicked from their wicked way in order to save their life, those wicked people shall die for their iniquity, but their blood I will require at your hand. But if you warn the wicked and they do not turn from their wickedness or from their wicked way, they shall die for their iniquity, but you will have saved your life. If, however, you warn the righteous not to sin and they do not sin, they shall surely live because they took warning, and you will have saved your life. So here, I think we go kind of from call, command, mandate, impulse into kind of feeding people's fear. That if I've got the job of sharing the good news with other people, if I've got the job of bringing these other people to a faithful and saving, whatever that means, understanding of who Jesus Christ is, then passages like this tell me that if I don't do it, I will be blamed for their deaths, for their punishment, because it's my job. I've got the information that they need in order to be saved. And if I don't share that information, then they will die. But if I share it with them and they reject it, at least then, I can kind of wash my hands of the whole thing and I don't get into trouble. But on the other hand, if I do warn about sin, or if I do bring someone to a saving knowledge, again, whatever that means, then they're saved and I'm saved because I've done my duty. And so kind of motivated by fear, motivated by the fear of judgment, the fear of retribution, the fear that God's wrath will kind of overflow from people who reject God onto us. And so this issue of conversion as the focus is legitimate, not something that your mainline churches talk about a whole lot, but very, very central to what the evangelical churches and the more conservative churches focus on all the time. As a kid, that was what it was about. How many people have you brought to Christ? Are you afraid to share your faith? Are you ashamed of the gospel? Meet me at the pole. Let's stand here in front of everyone and tell the world that we are faithful, that we're not afraid to share our faith. Let's stand on the street corner. Let's wear our WWJD bracelet in school and make sure everybody knows that we are a Christian because of that requirement by God that we do that.
I'll look at Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't know that they still walk around the houses and knock on doors, but
They do.
Oh, yeah.
They do.
do they? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Because and they take this as, yeah, they better do that.
Yep.
I've never been able to reconcile their going door to door, though, with the thing of, what is it, 144,000 people in heaven?
Right.
I mean, wouldn't you think they'd passed their quota a long time ago?
Yes. God's not going to take any more in, right?
Right.
No vacancy.
Well, so that seems kind of direct in an indirect way that, if you tell people not to sin and they don't, then you've saved your life, and it doesn't say anything about saving their life. Well, it says they'll live, but because they took warning. But then you're only saving your own life. Doesn't say you're going to save their life.
Yeah. So it doesn't really matter what the result is. It's about me making sure that I'm okay, right?
Okay. That's
At
what
least-
I'm thinking.
At least
That's
from
what
that
I'm thinking.
particular
I'm-
interpretation. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm just looking out for me.
yeah. Which is why.
Is that where that thing about? Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's why, the bullhorn people still do it. They know that they're not convincing anyone. They know that they're not actually achieving anything, but they don't really
Oh.
care.
I never thought of that.
They don't really care because they're doing themselves a favor. As long as I'm out here with my bullhorn, I'm sharing, I'm telling the wicked that I'm giving the warning. They've gotten their fair warning from me. And so I'm good to go. I don't really care what happens to them. And maybe, I don't know. I shouldn't be unfair. Maybe there are some out there who legitimately go and stand on the street corner because they really do want to save souls and win lives for Christ and all those, slogans that people throw around. But I suspect that a lot of them at this point, we know that that doesn't work.
Well, it makes them feel better.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pam, I think you're muted.
Oh, there. I get confused. So anyway, we were in Ecuador in a city. I honestly forget which city it was, but there was a big square, and there was a guy with a microphone blowhorn, thing, and we knew exactly what he was saying. He was trying to save all of us. And it was so funny because everybody in our little tour group, including our guide, kind of like moved over toward this side.
Mhm.
And kind of got out of the limelight. But yeah, you knew exactly what the guy was doing, even though it wasn't my language. So
Mhm.
yeah.
So, in terms of interacting with Christians, non-Christians as Christians, conversion is only one of the possible motivations. There are other motivations, and so I wanted to suggest some additional possibilities. One of the possibilities that I wanted to lift up is partnership, and this concept comes out of a book that I read in, when did I even read that? Seminary, I guess. It's just a very short little book, maybe 50 pages long, and it's called The Isaiah Vision. It's by a man named Raymond Fung. And he starts out by presenting this passage. Isaiah chapter 65. No more shall there be in Jerusalem an infant that lives but a few days, or an old person who does not live out a lifetime. For one who dies at 100 years will be considered accursed. They shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat. For like the days of a tree shall the days of my people be, and my chosen shall long enjoy the work of their hands. They shall not labor in vain or bear children for calamity, for they shall be offspring blessed by the Lord, and their descendants as well. So according to this book, there are basically three things that are called for in this passage. The Isaiah vision: children do not die, old people live with dignity, and working people benefit from their own labor and have what they need. And what the Isaiah vision is suggesting is that this is not just a kind of pie in the sky fantasy that Isaiah is expressing, that this is what's going to happen in God's future. This Isaiah vision is suggesting that this is the call, this is the job of a Christian, to do these things. But the author also admits that this task, this set of tasks, is not exclusive to Christians. That what it does is it shows that God's will is not confined within the boundaries of the church. It actually calls for partnership with the world to accomplish goals that we share with people who are not Christians, even if the reasons for our doing these things differ. So as a Christian, why do I volunteer at the school to make sure that children know how to read and do math? Or why do I go and advocate at the state level for more stricter regulations on assisted living situations to keep people from being abused? Or why do I work to make sure that people have a livable wage, that people have what they need, that no one is living in poverty? Why do I do these things? I do them because God told me to. I do them because I know that Christ loves me and has given me this unbelievable gift, and I'm overflowing with that grace and love to the point that I can't help but turn around and give it to someone else. Now, someone else that you run into, an atheist or a Muslim or a Buddhist, wouldn't have those same motivations. But that doesn't mean that they can't and don't want to do those same things. They just have a different reason for doing it. And so the Isaiah vision suggests that the best way for us to be Christians in the world is to stop worrying so much about whether somebody is or is not a Christian, and instead to just be Christians in the world. How should we interact with non-Christians? We should be Christians. We should behave in ways that are going to support this Isaiah vision. And as we do so, we are going to find partners. We are going to find co-conspirators in this task, some of whom may be Christians, some of whom will not be Christians. And we can tell people, we can share with them our own motivations, our own why we are in this fight, why we are participating in this. But that's not the goal. The goal is to work together to establish this Isaiah vision in the world, to make this a reality. And so it expresses the breadth of God's work in the world. It acknowledges that God is at work not just within the church. God is at work everywhere. God is at work through anyone. God doesn't need you or me or that atheist down the street to say, oh yes, I believe in Jesus. God needs those people to get up and do something about it. And so that's what the Isaiah vision suggests. Any questions or comments about that? It's a good book. I highly recommend it. He goes into some other areas too about, if you want to go beyond just the working together and you kind of, he talks about how the process of working with non-Christians can lead to discipleship of other people because they see your motivation, they see your, your energy, and they are compelled by that. And then from there, you can invite them into the world of worship and Christian community. But that's not the central piece. So questions, comments about that?
What's the name of the book again, Katie?
The Isaiah Vision.
Oh, it's right there on the screen. Sorry. The only thing that reading the last one, and maybe it's just because you put it simply, working people benefit from their own labor and have what they need. It sounds like they're not sharing with others.
No, it's so when we go back to the passage itself, it actually says,
Yeah, I was trying to do that.
They shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat. So the idea being that kind of the exploitation of labor, that, for example, somebody is working 2 full-time jobs at minimum wage and can't even afford to house their family in safe and secure.
Okay.
That kind of thing is how this person is interpreting that.
Okay.
Not that they're not sharing, not that they're not contributing to the economy generally, but that we aren't abusing them. We're not manipulating them. We're not taking advantage of their labor and not having any benefit for them.
Okay, thank you.
Karen? Karen, gotta unmute.
Sorry, my dog started barking, so I turned it off. The missionaries who went to Hawaii did everything wrong, and
I did.
just ruined that place. But I think I have friends today who go to places like Africa and other countries where they don't have very much, and they don't go there specifically to convert people, but to provide water or to help them build a road or to do something like that. And I think those actions actually have brought more people to Christ than passing out Bibles and things. It's like the action speaks louder than the words. I think that's probably what this means. We have to do things. We have to get up and move and do things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think to me, when we're talking about motivation, when we're thinking about this question, I think that what we need to think about is motivations of relationships, motivations of humility, and motivations of service, and kind of ask some questions. Do I care about this person or this group of people as a person, as a group of people, and not just as a statistic or as a notch in my own spiritual belt? Am I interacting with this person out of love? Am I interested in this person regardless of their status as a Christian or non-Christian? Or am I really only interested in them as a non-Christian, specifically because I can get something out of them for myself? I can use them for my own, to lift myself up or to give myself some kind of extra brownie points with God, or however that would work. Then also asking, is it my way or the highway kind of thing? Do I believe that the way that I experience God is the only way to experience God? Am I trying to force someone else to kind of put on my glasses and see the world and God through my lenses, through my experience? Or do I have enough humility to understand that God is bigger than me? God is bigger than any of my perceptions and experiences and abilities to expand my mind even as wide as I can possibly do it. We can ask questions, bless you. We can ask questions like, does God care if somebody calls on the name of the Lord? Some passages in the Bible say, yes, that's how you are saved. Other passages, which we have looked at before when we've talked about universalism, say something different. They say that at the end of times, all things, all people will be gathered to God. And so does that mean that it doesn't matter if you spend your life on earth believing a certain thing or going to church or behaving in a certain way, that no matter what, God loves you, and at the end of things, from our perspective, God is going to gather all things into God's self? That's a possibility. And the Bible allows for that possibility. And so how do we navigate those things? How do we read the passages that kind of seem to contradict each other on those things? I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to the Father except through me. Does it say except through belief in me? Does it say except through worship of me? Does it say except through my baptism in me? No, it just says through me. What does that mean? Does that mean that through the actions of Jesus Christ, all people have been given away to God, regardless of their behaviors, regardless of their beliefs? It could. But we live in a world that is so convinced of our own rightness that we intentionally read that kind of passage in a very closed way. Well, it says it right there. The only way to get to God is through Jesus. And so you got to believe in Jesus. Where does it say here that you've got to believe in Jesus to have that way? It doesn't. And so to have that humility to believe that maybe God is working through this person. Maybe the way that I perceive God, I could say to myself that, God is working through this person regardless of their wishes. I don't think it's very, it's particularly kind to, say that to someone, especially if you don't know them very well, because now you're imposing, your views on them and telling them that their opinions don't matter and that, they're just being manipulated by an entity that you believe in and they don't in some cases. Doesn't seem a very nice thing to say. But if you want to believe it that way in your mind, the Bible has support for that. There's not a one way, a one right way to understand this. Finally, to ask the question, do I have, and I put this in quotation marks on purpose, good news to share? When we talk about, the good news of Jesus Christ, I don't think that we completely get that. I don't think that we even want to get that in some cases. Because if somebody is suffering in a physical or emotional or mental or relational way, telling them, oh, well, Jesus loves you, is not necessarily the good news that they need to hear at that time. If someone is, stuck in a pit and you're walking down the road and you say, oh, well, I'm a Christian, it's my job to bring the good news of God's kingdom to this person. And you just yell down in the pit, hey, guess what? Jesus died for you and loves you very much. And then walk away. That's not good news to that person. What good news do you have to share with someone that will make a physical, literal difference in their daily struggles and suffering? The good news that that person in the pit needs is that I have a ladder. And yes, I am happy to share that ladder with you. Why? Because God has given me this ladder. God has blessed me in my life. And so I want to share that with you in this moment. And whether or not you respond to that and become a Christian or become my best friend is completely irrelevant, because my job is to share the good news. And that is the seed that God is planting through me. And if God wants to make that seed flourish, God will make that seed flourish in whatever crazy way God wants it to flourish, regardless of my perceptions and limitations that I want to impose on it. And so those are, I think, questions that we need to ask ourselves when we're thinking about this question. And, of course, I'm not talking necessarily about when you go to the bank and you're interacting with the clerk in the bank. Do I need to figure out if this interaction is an interaction between a Christian and a non-Christian so that I know what to do? No, because it doesn't matter. Can all of our relationships benefit from asking the question, as am I motivated by caring about this person? Can all of our relationships benefit from some humility? Can all of our relationships benefit from keeping in mind that the good news is not just information, but transformation? Of course it can. And so maybe this question about, how do we interact with non-Christians is kind of irrelevant if we go at it from that perspective.
Okay.
So comments, questions on any of that?
I agree. Those are good questions to ask.
All right.
But
Go ahead,
it
Pam.
still leaves you with wondering what to say when the young person at the grocery counter says, are you a Christian? Because it's just yes.
Or
That-
why are you asking? I might say, why are you asking?
It was something, because the one time it happened that was such a stumper for me.
Yeah.
It was when it was a long time ago because it was when Farmers Market was still at the bottom of our hill on Market Street by Ace Hardware. And it was this young Asian gal who looked like she was probably part of the Myanmar population, was the clerk. And it was after church on Sunday when I stopped by to pick something up. So I was still kind of dressing up in those days. And she asked me, and I just thought, I could tell she had an accent. I did not want to get into it with her. And I was just stymied because I thought she might mean another kind of Christian than the one I am. It was a very thoughtful moment. I'm not quite over it yet, but one of these years.
Well, Pam, once again, you have given me a lovely segue into the next section, because I think that when this question was asked to me with the words that I was given, but I think what it's really about is do we need to do evangelism? Is that something that we're supposed to do? Is our job, is our first job, is our priority job as Christians to convert non-Christians, to be concerned about non-Christians, to try to, make them Christians? I think this person was asking. And so what is evangelism really about? And I think it's about, first and foremost, relationships. That person, we don't know her motivation for asking you that question. But I think the problem that you were experiencing was not discomfort necessarily with answering her question, but that there was no relationship. There was no possibility for relationship. She was the checkout clerk. You couldn't stay there and stand there and talk to her for an hour about what it meant to you to be a Christian. You had to just answer the question yes or no and move on. And that isn't what Christianity is about. We are trained to believe that, we have to be martyrs. We have to be prepared to be persecuted for our faith. And so if somebody asks us if we are Christians, we've got to be ready to say, yes, of course I'm a Christian, no matter what that is going to mean. When I was a teenager and I was told that, when I was told that I had to go to the school and stand around the pole with the others and pray for my school, and people were going to look at me and treat me poorly, no, they're not. Nobody cares about that. What really is important is what happens in our relationships. How we develop relationships with people and show them who we are. Not tell them who we are, but show them truly who we are. And I think that is where the true possibility for what we would call persecution comes up. Not because people are disagreeing with us and telling us that the things that we're doing are inappropriate and hurtful to others, because hopefully we're not doing things that are inappropriate and hurtful to others, but because people are going to take advantage of us. This past week, we had a whole bunch of people coming into Shasta County from surrounding counties who've been evacuated because of all the different fires that are surrounding us. And a lot of the people that came to the Red Cross shelter at Shasta College had pets. And the Red Cross is famous for its big limitation that they cannot take any pets. No pets can come into the shelter with people. And so they make accommodations. In our case, we've got Haven Humane willing to take on animals. But the last thing you want to do after you've left your home and don't know if you're ever going to get back to it is to also have to leave your pet and not know if you're going to get back to it. And so some of the local churches, including Pilgrim and St. James, First Christian and First United Methodist, banded together, and we said, well, if there are people who have pets, we can try to accommodate some of them in our classrooms at our churches. And we can, if they have a trailer, we can accommodate them in our parking lot. And so these people have been staying. And one of the people that was encountered by Pastor Janet Chapman over at First Christian, who's kind of spearheading this whole thing, was a couple that got into town in a car that has no brake pads left, that has several different problems with the carburetor and all kinds of things. And they are not going to be able to get home in this car. There's no way that it's going to make it back. And so she called me and she asked if we might be able to support it through our disaster care ministry at St. James to get this car fixed. And I wrote out to the group and I explained the situation to them. And some of the people on this committee are the ones that, ask the hard questions. And I always give them anything that comes to us. I always give it to them regardless of my opinion on it, because I think it's their job to decide. And some of the people, their role on the committee is to ask those hard questions. Well, where is this person coming from, and have they been vetted, and are we sure that they really were evacuated from this place, and all those kinds of things. And I'm glad that I have those people, because we want to make sure that we're being good stewards of the funds that we've been given to help people in disaster situations, and be aware that it's not just this person. There are going to be others that are in need. But I kind of take on a role of the intentionally naive person in those kind of situations. If somebody asks me for help and I am able to give it to them, does it really matter that much if they're telling me the whole truth? Can I help someone? Can I build a relationship with someone from the perspective of trust and seeing a need and just instantly filling it without asking all those questions, without, asking for the vetting? Yes, of course, if the same person was knocking on the church door week after week after week telling me, oh, I'm so sorry, my car broke down in front of your church. Oh, I'm so sorry, my car broke down in front of your church. Yeah, then you start asking some questions, I don't think you get angry and push the person away. I think you try to get behind that. What's going on in your life that is making you this desperate, that you're coming to the same place again and again for the same reason, trying to pull the wool over my eyes? But I think that's what it's about. It's about those building relationships, and it's about building those trust networks. Janet called me and she asked me to help these people, and I didn't even think anything of it. I said, of course I'm going to help you, because she knows these people. There's somebody that she has experienced that she wants to help, and she's asking for help. And so I'm willing to help her with that. And we did, by the way, vote to give some money toward that situation.
Good.
So, just being a decent human, I think, is step one in evangelism. Having conversations with people, developing friendships, sharing your life with someone, kind of bleeds into telling your stories, sharing your story with someone else, and sharing how your story fits into God's story from your perspective. Not because you're trying to convince them to take the same perspective as you, not because you need them to, say some certain thing or believe some certain thing, but because you want them to know you and you want to know them. And so you can say to somebody, from my perspective, the fact that the governor, the state public health officer for the state of California put out a very strongly worded letter to all the districts in the state the exact same day that my children's school was meeting to decide whether they were going to get rid of the mask mandate and let kids come to school with wearing no masks. I think that was a God moment. I think that was perfectly timed so that my kids' school is protected from from having kids running around not wearing masks, getting COVID all over each other. Do you believe that was a God moment? Do you believe that was, the work of the Holy Spirit in the world? I don't really care. I'm not asking you to, but I'm sharing with you the way that I interpret the world around me. And I would love to hear the way that you interpret the world around you. And so it's about that journey, it's about developing those relationships so that you journey together. You're being willing to be challenged and changed. Your humility, that you're remembering that you aren't the holder of all that God is capable of in the world. And so your openness, your excitement about learning more about that and how that might be worked out in someone else's life, even if they don't perceive it that way. And then, of course, always being ready and open to the surprises that will come through the work of the Holy Spirit, because God can and will work on you through the words and actions of people that you consider to be non-Christians, even as you think that you are working on them to change their lives. And so, again, to have that humility in that relationship. So I think that is what evangelism is really about. It's not about the bullhorn on the street corner. It's not even about the conversions. It's not about the number of notches you can get in your belt. It's about the relationships, the stories, the getting on that path together, and being, keeping your eyes open for the work of the Spirit in your life and in the life of this person or group or whatever it is that you're engaging with. So, how should Christians interact with non-Christians? Coming back around to our original question. Well, Katie believes that first and foremost, people of all self-identifications or identifications by other people are beloved children of God. And so we're not here to interact with you as a non-Christian because we want something out of you, because we want to manipulate you, because we think that you've got to do X, Y, or Z, or say X, Y, or Z, or believe X, Y, or Z in order for God to love you, because that's just abjectly false. That's just right on the ground false. I don't think that somebody has to agree with your beliefs or your motivations to be a quote unquote good or moral person. So I think that, we can respect other people's perspectives on how the world works and how the world doesn't work, but we can also maintain our own perspectives. And if that person that you're in that relationship with can't respect your perspectives and your positions, that of course you are not shoving down their throat, then that's not a relationship. And that's probably not a relationship that you should be in. Like some of the ones that we have with, unfortunately, people who also call themselves Christians and are themselves not respecting our positions as Christians. But I think the key to all of this is to remember that it is God that is in charge, God who is choosing how all of these things are playing out and not us. And so when we're interacting with non-Christians as Christians, or when we're interacting with people who claim to be Christians as Christians that we don't agree with, it's not our job to fix them. It's not our job to make them into our own image. They are already made in God's image. And so how do we honor that? How do we respect that? How do we challenge them to honor and respect that in us and in others? And I think that is what the interaction should look like. So wrapping it up, like I like to, bring us around to one final Bible passage from Isaiah chapter 55. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. For as the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return until they have watered the earth, making it bring forth and sprout, giving seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so shall my word that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose and succeed in the thing for which I sent it. So, comments, questions, disagreements, angry diatribes.
Makes a lot of sense.
Interesting.
I'm going to get an angry diatribe. This is I think this is lesson 13 on this, and I still don't have any angry diatribes.
We'll work on it, Katie.
Thank you, Pam.
I don't know what there is to disagree with that. I mean, basically everything we've said today is that we should treat all people, regardless of their status, with the same kind of respect and love that they deserve.
And not even wonder whether they're Christian or non-Christian. Just be yourself and do what you can.
Yeah.
Very good.
Is that right, Katie?
Well, I think so.
Is that the right answer?
I'm always waiting for somebody to say I'm wrong, but you'll never do. Well, maybe next week I can get some people angry with me, because next week we're talking about the question, is the devil real? And many of you have already heard my out on this one, so I have to save it till the end. I do not believe in the devil. And so we'll talk about that. We'll look at some passages in the Bible that talk about the devil, and we'll see what everybody has to say.
Okay. Hey, Katie, how do we get to last week's recording?
If you go to stjamesca.org, stjamesca.org. You can access our YouTube page, and the YouTube page has all of our videos, including the recordings of previous classes.
Great, thank you.
Very welcome. And all you out there listening, I guess you already know that, but just in case you don't, and you ran across this some other way, go to stjamesca.org. There's our advertisement for the day.
That's going to be an interesting class next week. I don't know.
Bring
It's going to be interesting.
bring your pitchfork.
Sharpen your ears. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Any final thoughts or questions today?
No, thanks for having me back. It's
All
good.
right. Wonderful. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a
Thank
fabulous
you.
week.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.